2 billion people. That number should terrify Washington, because that's exactly how many humans just united in a trading bloc designed specifically to bypass the United States of America. Not in a decade, not gradually, today, January 27, 2026, and by the time you finish watching this video, you'll understand why this might be the most significant shift in global power since the Cold War ended. Hours ago in New Delhi, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stood before cameras beside Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The air in that room carried weight that extended far beyond a diplomatic ceremony. 2 decades of failed negotiations, 20 years of bureaucratic stalling, cultural clashes, and competing economic interests, all of it resolved in a matter of weeks. Von der Leyen declared they had concluded what she called the mother of all deals. The phrase wasn't chosen casually. This was theatrical. This was deliberate. This was Europe and India announcing to the entire world that they had found each other, and they had found each other precisely because America pushed them away. Consider the mathematics for a moment. The European Union represents 27 nations and roughly 450 million people with a combined economy exceeding $18 trillion. India houses 1.4 billion people in the fastest-growing major economy on Earth. Together, they've created a free trade zone encompassing more than 1/4 of all human beings alive today. And this alliance formed directly in response to Donald Trump's trade policies, not despite those policies, because of them. But this is only the first act of what unfolded today. 3,000 miles west of New Delhi, in the waters of the Persian Gulf, American warships were taking position. President Trump confirmed in an interview that what he calls a big armada now sits within striking distance of Iran. The aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, guided missile destroyers bristling with Tomahawk cruise missiles, F-35 fighter jets ready for combat sorties, all aimed at a nation convulsing with the deadliest protests in its 46-year history. And back in Washington, Trump fired another shot across a different ally's bow. He announced on social media that he's raising tariffs on South Korea from 15% to 25%. No advance warning, no diplomatic notification. Seoul learned about it the same way you're learning about it now. From a Truth Social post. 3 confrontations, 3 continents, 1 single day. This is American foreign policy in the second year of Trump's return to power. Let me take you inside each of these developments because understanding their connections reveals something profound about where the world is heading. Start with the mother of all deals. European negotiators had been working on a trade agreement with India since 2007, almost 20 years of talks that went absolutely nowhere. Both sides zealously protected domestic interests. Indian farmers didn't want European dairy flooding their markets with cheaper butter and cheese. European pharmaceutical companies didn't want Indian generics undercutting their carefully protected pricing structures. German automakers demanded access to Indian consumers, while Indian textile manufacturers demanded access to European shoppers. The talks became a permanent fixture of diplomatic calendars, everyone knowing they would continue indefinitely and equally knowing they would never actually conclude. Then Donald Trump imposed 50% tariffs on Indian goods entering America. Prime Minister Modi watched Indian exports crater almost overnight. Textiles that had flowed to American department stores suddenly cost consumers 50% more. Gems and jewelry that Indian craftsmen had polished for American buyers became prohibitively expensive. Footwear that clothed American feet faced duties that made Vietnamese and Indonesian alternatives more attractive. Industries employing tens of millions of workers found themselves suddenly priced out of their largest and most lucrative market. The traditional response would have been to negotiate with Washington, accept American terms, trade sovereignty for market access, open Indian dairy to American products, reduce protections for Indian manufacturers, whatever it took to regain access to 330 million American consumers. Modi chose a different path entirely. Over the past 12 months, India signed trade agreements with the United Kingdom, with Oman, with New Zealand, with Australia. Each deal created alternative pathways for Indian goods. Each agreement reduced dependence on American consumers. The exports Washington tried to block found new destinations. Indian textiles reached British shelves. Indian jewelry adorned Gulf consumers. Indian footwear walked New Zealand streets. And always the ultimate prize remained visible in the distance: Europe. Von der Leyen faced her own reckoning. Trump's return had shattered European assumptions about transatlantic partnership built over 7 decades. He threatened tariffs on European nations over the Greenland dispute, demanding territory from a sovereign ally as the price of trade normalcy. He embraced far-right parties that European mainstream leaders viewed with genuine alarm. He questioned NATO's mutual defense commitment in ways that made European capitals wonder whether American troops would actually fight for them. He made clear over and over that alliance commitments might depend entirely on trade concessions. The European response crystallized around a phrase: strategic autonomy. In practice, this meant building economic relationships robust enough to survive American hostility. Over the past year, von der Leyen signed deals with Japan, with Indonesia, with Mexico, and with the Mercosur bloc of South American nations, including Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. India represented the final piece of a puzzle Europe had been assembling for years. A massive consumer market of 1.4 billion people, a growing manufacturing base capable of producing goods Europe needs, a partner that shared Europe's interest in rule-based international trade as an alternative to American unpredictability. What took 20 years under normal circumstances took mere weeks once both sides recognized their shared interest in reducing American leverage over their economies. The terms they agreed to tell the entire story. India will eliminate or cut tariffs on 96.6% of European goods entering the country. German automakers just gained access to a market where they'll sell 250,000 vehicles annually at preferential duty rates. That quota is 6 times larger than any India has offered in previous trade deals. French wine producers can now reach Indian consumers without prohibitive duties that made Bordeaux unaffordable to Mumbai's growing middle class. Italian fashion houses, Spanish machinery manufacturers, Swiss pharmaceutical companies, all of them celebrated today. Europe, in exchange, slashes duties on 99.5% of Indian products entering the bloc. Those textile workers in Mumbai stitching garments for export, those jewelry craftsmen in Jaipur cutting gems. Their families have worked for generations. Those leather workers in Chennai producing footwear that rivals Italian quality at a fraction of the cost. They just gained access to 500 million European consumers who will pay less for their products than American buyers currently do. Bilateral trade between these two economic giants stood at $136 billion last fiscal year. The European Commission projects that number will double within 7 years. That's $270 billion in annual trade, flowing between New Delhi and Brussels. Trade that doesn't touch American shores. Commerce that doesn't require American approval. Economic activity that American companies cannot participate in and American workers cannot benefit from. Listen carefully to how both leaders framed this achievement, because the language they chose tells you everything about their intentions. Modi spoke of strengthening stability in the international system at a time of turmoil in the global order. Those words carry precise diplomatic meaning. Turmoil refers to Washington. Stability refers to everyone working around American chaos. Von der Leyen called it a strong message that rules-based cooperation remains the best answer to global challenges. Rules-based cooperation. Another pointed contrast with an administration that imposes tariffs by social media post at midnight, without consulting Congress or notifying allies through proper diplomatic channels. Antonio Costa, president of the European Council, put it most directly of all. In a reshaping global order, he said, The EU and India stand together as strategic, reliable partners. Reliable. That word echoes through European statements like a drumbeat now. It appears in speech after speech, communiqué after communiqué. Reliable is everything European leaders believe America no longer is. The Trump administration's response confirms they understand exactly what just happened and exactly what it means for American power. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent appeared on ABC News and did not hide his frustration. The United States has made much bigger sacrifices than Europeans have, he complained to the interviewer. He pointed specifically to the 50% tariffs America imposed on India as punishment for purchasing Russian oil despite American objections. Washington sacrificed trade with India to pressure Moscow. Washington expected Europe to follow that lead, and then Bessent asked a question that revealed everything about how fundamentally Washington miscalculated. Guess what happened last week? The Europeans signed a trade deal with India. There it is. The strategy was isolation. Punish India for dealing with Russia. Force New Delhi into compliance through economic pain. Make the Indians so desperate for market access that they would accept whatever terms Washington dictated. Instead, India found willing partners eager to trade on better terms than America offered. The isolation Washington designed so carefully is forming around Washington instead. Now shift your attention 3,000 miles to the west. The USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group has arrived in waters near Iran. President Trump confirmed this deployment in his interview with Axios, describing it as a big armada positioned close to the Iranian coast. He compared the force to the naval armada sent to Venezuela before American Special Operations Forces captured President Nicolas Maduro in a lightning raid earlier this year. This armada, he said, is even bigger. Inside Iran, the situation defies simple description. Protests that began in late December among shopkeepers, angry about economic conditions, have exploded into the deadliest uprising since the Islamic Revolution brought the current government to power in 1979. Human rights organizations with networks of observers inside the country estimate more than 5,000 Iranians have been killed by security forces in just 4 weeks. The government itself admits to 3,000 deaths while blaming terrorists and foreign agents for the violence. The currency has collapsed. The real trades at rates that make imported goods unaffordable for ordinary families. Inflation runs at nearly 45% annually. Food prices have risen almost 90% compared to last year. Young Iranians who remember nothing but economic hardship and political repression see no future worth waiting for. The internet remains blacked out across most of the country. Iranians trying to share images of the crackdown risk imprisonment or worse. Yet footage continues emerging through channels that authorities cannot fully control. Videos showing uniformed officers firing directly into crowds of unarmed protesters. Images of young people bleeding in streets while terrified bystanders scream and scatter. Photographs of detention centers overflowing with arrested demonstrators. Trump claims personal credit for preventing mass executions of protesters. He says he warned Iranian leaders they would face American military strikes if they proceeded with announced plans to hang hundreds of detained demonstrators. I stopped 837 hangings on Thursday, he told reporters aboard Air Force One. They would have been dead, every one of them, mostly young men. An hour before this horrible event was scheduled, they canceled it. Iran's government calls these claims completely false. They deny any executions were canceled because of American threats. They deny American warnings influenced their decisions in any way. What cannot be denied is the military buildup visible to anyone with satellite access. Fighter jets capable of striking Iranian targets within hours. Air defense systems positioned to protect American forces from Iranian retaliation. Guided missile destroyers loaded with enough Tomahawk cruise missiles to devastate Iranian infrastructure. Trump says Iran's leadership wants to negotiate. They called on numerous occasions, he reported. They want to talk. They want to make a deal. Iranian officials tell a completely different story. Revolutionary Guard commanders warn that their finger is on the trigger. The Foreign Ministry declares that any American attack would constitute all-out war, with consequences reaching far beyond the Middle East. Regional powers are taking sides. The United Arab Emirates announced they will not allow their airspace or territory to be used in any attack on Iran. That's a critical restriction given UAE's proximity to Iranian targets and the presence of major American military facilities there. This is the environment in which European and Indian leaders signed their historic trade agreement today. American military force massing for potential conflict with Iran that could engulf the entire Middle East. American economic force punishing allies and adversaries alike without warning or consistency. And nations around the world concluding that American partnership now carries costs that may exceed any possible benefits. Which brings us to South Korea. Seoul woke up this morning to news that tariffs on their exports to America would jump from 15% to 25% overnight. They learned this from a Trump social media post published without advance notification through diplomatic channels. No warning from the State Department. No advance notice from Commerce. Nothing through the ambassador. A Truth Social post that caught Korean officials completely off guard. Trump's public explanation: the Korean legislature hasn't ratified the trade agreement he reached with President Lee Jae-myung last summer. American procedures allowed Trump to implement tariffs immediately through executive authority derived from emergency powers. Korean democratic procedures required legislative approval. That necessarily takes time as bills move through committees and floor votes. Seoul's response reveals both shock and desperate scrambling. The Trade Ministry announced that Minister Kim Jung-kwon would fly immediately from Canada, where he was on official business, to Washington for emergency talks with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. The presidential office declared it had received absolutely no official notification of the tariff increase before seeing it on social media. The ruling Democratic Party rushed to announce they would pass the necessary legislation by the end of February. But passing legislation doesn't erase what happened. South Korea hosts 28,000 American troops on their soil. They stand on the front line of deterrence against North Korean nuclear threats. They've been among America's most loyal allies in Asia for over 70 years, since American forces fought and died to preserve Korean independence during the Korean War. Today they learn that their alliance with America doesn't protect them from being publicly punished for having a democratic legislature that moves at its own pace rather than American pace. The automobile sector illustrates the devastating economic impact. South Korean automakers Hyundai and Kia watched their stock prices plunge when Trump's announcement hit global markets. Cars represent 27% of Korean exports to America. Nearly half of all vehicles Korean factories produce for export destinations go to American consumers. A 10 percentage point tariff increase means billions of dollars in additional costs that will be paid either by Korean companies accepting reduced profit margins or American consumers paying higher prices at dealerships. And remember, this punishment falls on an ally. Not a rival power, not a strategic competitor, a nation that fought alongside America in Vietnam, a nation that sends troops to support American operations worldwide, a nation that agreed to invest $350 billion in the American economy as part of the very deal Trump now claims they're violating. Other American allies watch Seoul get blindsided today. They're drawing conclusions about what American friendship actually means in this era. Every nation calculating whether to sign trade agreements with Washington now sees what happens when domestic democratic procedures move slower than American executive expectations. Every democracy that might require legislative approval for international commitments now understands the risk of dealing with an administration that governs by social media post and expects instant compliance. This is the context explaining why Europe and India rushed to complete their deal. This is why von der Leyen spent the past year signing agreements with every economy willing to trade on predictable terms. The alternative is dependence on a partner that changes terms without warning, punishes differences in democratic process, and treats allies as subordinates rather than equals. Step back from these individual developments and observe the larger pattern forming. The international economic system America built after World War II was designed specifically to bind nations together through trade. Open markets rewarded allies who aligned with Washington. Economic integration made military conflict between trading partners expensive and irrational. The dollar's centrality to global commerce gave Washington influence over every economy on Earth without requiring military force to exercise that influence. That system is fragmenting before our eyes. When 2 billion people can trade more freely with each other than with America, leverage shifts fundamentally. When entire continents build economic architecture that roots around American policy, influence wanes regardless of military strength. When allies openly choose partnerships with each other rather than continued dependence on Washington, the calculations that held the post-war order together begin failing. The European Union didn't just sign a trade deal with India today. They've signed deals with Japan, Indonesia, Mexico, and South America already this year. Each agreement creates constituencies invested in maintaining non-American trade routes. Each partnership reduces the cost of American disapproval because alternatives now exist. India didn't just gain European market access today. They demonstrated conclusively that Trump's tariffs, rather than forcing compliance with American demands, accelerated the search for alternatives. Other nations facing American economic pressure will study the Modi playbook carefully. Find partners willing to trade on equal terms. Build relationships that can survive American hostility. Wait patiently for American tariffs to become irrelevant as new markets mature and expand. Even nations not directly involved in today's developments are recalibrating their strategic calculations. Japan watches its neighbor Korea get punished without warning and wonders if they're next. Australia sees its European allies turning increasingly toward Asia and questions the reliability of American security guarantees. Canada, already threatened with 100% tariffs for pursuing trade with China, recognizes that American partnership demands may exceed what any sovereign nation can reasonably accept. Beijing is watching all of this with undisguised satisfaction. Every American ally that gets publicly humiliated becomes a potential partner for Chinese outreach. Every nation squeezed by American tariffs becomes more receptive to Chinese trade offers. The Belt and Road Initiative that American policy was designed to counter gains momentum each time Washington pushes another country away. The question Washington should be asking is not how to punish these defections more severely. The question is whether defections have reached a tipping point where punishment no longer works because alternatives have become too attractive and too numerous. Every threat that goes unfulfilled reduces the credibility of future threats. Every tariff that accelerates counter-alliances worsens America's long-term position. Every ally that gets blindsided becomes a cautionary tale, discouraging others from depending on American partnership. Meanwhile, what does America's current trade strategy actually produce for ordinary Americans? Farmers require billions of dollars in bridge payments because tariffs disrupted the export markets they depended on for decades. The administration has had to bail out agricultural producers hurt by the very policies designed to help them compete globally. Consumers face persistent price inflation, driven partly by duties on imported goods that make everything from electronics to clothing more expensive. Supply chains that American companies built over decades now route through countries that don't face American tariffs, costing American workers the manufacturing jobs those supply chains once supported. And now the alternatives America's tariff policy tried to block are materializing anyway. Indian textiles will reach European consumers duty-free, while American consumers pay 50% premiums for the same products. European cars will flood Indian streets, while American manufacturers face retaliatory barriers. Trade that once moved through American markets will simply flow around them. January 27, 2026 deserves to be remembered. 3 developments on 3 continents revealed with unprecedented clarity where global commerce is heading. An armada sits near Iran, waiting for orders that could spark regional war affecting global energy supplies for years. South Korea learned that its alliance with America doesn't protect it from economic punishment delivered via social media. And in New Delhi, 2 billion people formed a trading bloc designed specifically because American partnership became too costly, too unpredictable, and too demanding to rely upon any longer. The mother of all deals is signed and sealed. The message it sends to every nation watching is unmistakable. The world is building an economy that doesn't need American permission to function and doesn't need American markets to prosper. Whether Washington can still reverse this trajectory, or whether today marks the point of no return, depends entirely on decisions not yet made. But the window for course correction may be far narrower than anyone in the American capital realizes. And it closes further with every ally pushed away, every tariff escalated, every threat delivered by social media instead of diplomacy. The world just turned its back on America. What happens next is up to Washington,